I don't know when people start preparing to disappear. Maybe it's a slow removal. Your name slipping off envelopes, your voice no longer needed in meetings, your chair at the table remaining empty without comment. I read the message twice. It was short, punctual. Mom, maybe sit this one out. It's mostly internal. Everyone's aligned on that. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down next to my coffee mug. The ring on my left hand clinked softly against the ceramic. It still fit, though the skin beneath it had thinned. I had once resized it after childbirth. My hands had swollen too much for the original band. No one had noticed I never changed it back. Evan used to end messages with "love you." That line had disappeared a few months ago, like a shelf slowly being cleared one item at a time. I logged into the company portal, or tried to. My credentials returned a red error. User not recognized. I checked the spelling. Retyped the password. Then I clicked on the public-facing board directory. There it was clearly listed under ownership. Charles Walker, Brianna Caldwell Walker. Not Charles and Janet. Not the name I carried through payroll, client dinners, vendor disputes, and 3 economic downturns. Just them. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than I needed to. The cursor blinked in place like it was waiting for something else I might try. There was nothing else. The mug had left a faint brown ring on the wood. I wiped it with the side of my hand. It left a streak instead. There was a voicemail from Nora Benson, former office assistant, retired now, but still sharp in the quiet way people overlook. "Hi, Janet. This may be nothing, but I saw Charles last Thursday. Silver Oak Hotel. He wasn't alone. It was Brianna. They didn't seem discreet. I thought you'd want to know, or maybe not. Either way, I'm sorry." The voicemail was time-stamped at 11:43 a.m. I sat back and watched the sun move across the kitchen counter. A strip of light stopped at the edge of the bread box. I had bought that bread box the year Charles got promoted, back when he said we should host more because you're so much better at keeping a room than I am. I remember him saying it with his tie still crooked and a champagne stain on his cuff. I reached into the junk drawer and pulled out a stack of old photos. One had curled at the edge. It was from our company's 5th anniversary. Charles holding a plaque. I'm off to the side, one hand on his shoulder. I don't remember being asked to step aside, but I must have. There was a faint crease across my face where the photo had bent. My inbox pinged with a new email. I already knew what it would be. Subject: 40-year commemoration. Executive invitation body. Dear Mr. Charles Walker and Mrs. Brianna Walker, we are honored to invite you to represent the legacy of the company's founding. Companion attendance does not require listing. There was no space for me in that line. I reread it. There wasn't a version of that sentence that included me without someone asking the obvious. Why would she be there? I left the email open and went to the closet. I still kept the navy blue suit from our 10th anniversary gala in a garment bag. It was one of the last pieces I had tailored. The dry cleaner had pinned the tag "Crooked Mrs. W. Walker" in red marker. I hadn't worn it since. The hanger creaked as I lifted it. My thumb caught the zipper and it snagged halfway down. The silk lining had stuck. I tugged gently, but the fabric tore a half-inch where the seam met the shoulder. When I returned to the kitchen, the ring stain had dried darker than before. My mug was empty. The voicemail icon was still pulsing on my phone. Charles had once told me when I was pregnant with Evan and bedridden for a month. You're disappearing into motherhood. Just don't disappear from yourself. I remember the pause after that. It wasn't concern. It was a warning. Like he didn't want to be married to someone who forgot how to stay visible. Now he had rewritten the history without my name. I closed the laptop. It made a sound like an exhale. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't forward the email to anyone or delete it in anger. I just let it sit there in my inbox, unopened again. There's something about omission that feels colder than insult. You can argue with an insult. You can't argue with being left off the list. I picked up my phone. Not to call Evan, not to reply. I opened the Photos app and scrolled until I found the picture from last Thanksgiving. Brianna's arm looped through Charles's. Evan cutting the turkey. I was blurred in the background, reflected in the window behind them. I looked like part of the wallpaper, but I had set that table, ironed that tablecloth, paid for the wine with a checkbook that no longer had my name on the account. I took a screenshot of the photo and saved it to a new album. I named it Evidence, though not for court, just to remember what people look like when they think you're not in the frame. I didn't respond to Evan's message. I didn't confront Charles. I didn't call Brianna. I returned the ring to my finger and straightened the coffee mug so the handle pointed forward. Then I sat still long enough to hear the refrigerator hum, the old floor creak, the house remember me. If they had erased me, I would leave the space blank. Let the absence speak for itself. It doesn't happen all at once the way you start giving things away without meaning to. I remember stepping down from the boardroom not because anyone forced me, but because I thought stepping aside would make room. Evan had just turned 30. He had ideas. He had energy. Charles said, "Let's give them space to breathe." So I packed my office, slowly labeled, the files, clearly left a note in the second drawer with passwords and vendor histories, little bridges so no one would feel lost. I gave Evan full voting rights over the Hartman Trust 2 years later. I had overseen that fund from its inception, back when Charles said he didn't have the patience for long-term assets. I handed over the binder with the quiet thought, he needs a win of his own. There was no ceremony, just a quiet transfer over breakfast. I had made toast. He didn't eat it. The crusts curled a little before I cleared the plate. "You're doing the right thing. It's time for the next generation to carry the vision," Charles said. He didn't look up when he said it. His tie was still loose, and the financial section of the newspaper sat unread next to his elbow. I made tea. Evan poured himself orange juice and checked his phone. No one said thank you, no one had to. At least that's what I told myself then. It became habit me smoothing edges others left rough. After tense family dinners, I stayed behind to stack dishes while the rest went to the patio. I brewed chamomile when Evan's face tightened in meetings. I chose centerpieces that didn't clash with Brianna's dresses. I kept extra deodorant in my bag during galas, because once she whispered to me in the ladies' room, "I think someone forgot to freshen up." She didn't mean herself. In Napa Valley, Charles booked a surprise weekend. I packed a light scarf I'd always worn on cool evenings, gray, with pale blue stitching. On the second day, it was gone. I checked the back seat, the armrest to the hotel closet. In its place was a faint streak of red across the leather upholstery, the kind that doesn't smear unless it's been pressed into skin. Brianna wore that color often. Bold, matte, deliberate. I didn't mention it. That night at dinner, Charles ordered for me. When I did bring it up later in the car, he didn't raise his voice. "You're imagining things, Janet. Maybe the cleaning staff misplaced yours. Could belong to anyone." He didn't ask what I saw. He didn't check the back seat. Just turned the music up half a notch. A week after we got home, Brianna stopped by with a hostess gift, sea salt truffles I was allergic to. "You should take time for yourself," she said lightly. "Spa days, hiking, maybe pottery. Just don't let the world leave you behind." She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. That was easier than figuring out where the line was between insult and advice. Evan chuckled and said, "You know how Brianna is always looking out, looking out." During a quarterly planning session, I suggested we increase the reserve for employee wellness, more flexibility for medical leave. Brianna sipped her coffee and spoke before anyone else. Shouldn't the ones actually running day to day make those calls? Her tone was soft, but the words were steel. No one pushed back. Charles examined the legs of his wine glass like he was memorizing the color. I excused myself halfway through that meeting. No one noticed. I used to write handwritten notes to the staff each holiday. One year, the cards were intercepted and printed over with a company logo, my signature left off entirely. The explanation I got was design consistency. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. That was the phrase people used to remove fingerprints from things you'd built. During Thanksgiving last year, Brianna organized the seating chart. "You don't mind being at the end, do you?" she said. "It's easier for the servers." The table was U-shaped. My chair faced the hallway. The only person who could see me directly was the caterer. After dessert, someone suggested a group photo. "Let's just do the core team first," Brianna said, arranging Charles, Evan, and herself by the fireplace. I offered to take the picture. No one objected. No one waved me in after. That night, I folded the linen napkins myself and put them in a separate drawer. I don't know why. The part that stays with me isn't what they did, but how gently they did it, like rearranging furniture in a room I no longer lived in. There's a coat I keep at the back of the hall closet. Navy wool, worn soft at the cuffs. Charles once said it made me look reliable. I used to wear it to every board meeting. It still hangs there. Still smells like cedar. The buttons are slightly loose now, and one lining seam has frayed. I haven't had it repaired. I used to believe that if I kept showing up, kept ironing shirts, baking for birthdays, remembering which contracts needed renewal, eventually someone would say, "We couldn't have done this without you." But those words never came. Instead, I heard, "It's easier when you let us take the lead. You tend to hold on to things too long. This generation's doing things differently. Maybe just enjoy the view." I used to nod and clear the plates. There's a ceramic teacup in the pantry, slight crack along the rim. I never throw it out. I just don't serve from it anymore. Some things stay even when they're no longer used. I don't know when I stopped being necessary, but I remember the first time I looked around a room full of people I knew and felt like an extra in their memory. I didn't say anything then. I just handed someone the salt. Some silences don't come from the absence of sound, but from knowing you were never meant to be heard in the first place. At Evan and Brianna's wedding, I was seated at table 12. The floral arrangements were lovely white peonies, roses too much eucalyptus. Someone had made an effort. I recognized the man beside me as the former chauffeur we let go when Evan turned 16. Across from me sat Helen, the woman who used to help with laundry when Charles was traveling more than home. She wore a brooch I once gifted for Christmas. She didn't seem to remember where it came from. Charles gave a toast. He stood tall, spoke slowly, like the patriarch of a well-earned dynasty. He raised a glass to family tradition, resilience, and new beginnings. He didn't mention my name. Evan looked at Brianna the entire time. She dabbed beneath her eye, as though touched by poetry. The framed photo they hung later in the hallway caught my eye, not for what it included, but for what it didn't. Charles stood with one hand on Evan's shoulder, the other lightly resting at Brianna's back. All three of them looked forward toward a future someone had clearly outlined. I wasn't in the frame. The photographer must have cropped it intentionally. My dress was dark navy, easy to fade into a corner. I remember smiling. My hand was on Evan's arm, but from the angle they chose, that arm seemed free. They played a video during the reception, a montage of childhood college courtship. The soundtrack was polished sentimental. There was one moment, Charles in the vineyard with Brianna pouring her a glass. She turned toward him. wrapped both arms around his waist and leaned in too long. His hand hovered briefly at her lower back. I thought the shot would cut, but it lingered just a moment more. Gloria Henderson stopped by last week. She lives across the hedge, the kind of neighbor who still bakes banana bread but leaves out the sugar. She held out a manila envelope. I wasn't going to say anything, Janet, but I thought you should see. Inside was a single printed photo, taken from a distance, slightly blurry but unmistakable. Charles's car, the same dark overcoat. The passenger door opened, Brianna stepping out. They were close. Her hand gripped his wrist. His face bent toward hers, not quite touching, but close enough that a breath would have changed everything. Gloria folded her hands. That's not how a father-in-law holds his son's wife. I didn't deny it. I didn't argue. I just set the photo face down on the counter. I think I need to be quiet long enough to hear what's true. Gloria didn't ask what I meant. I left the photo there until evening, then slipped it into an old cookbook no one ever used. In the dining room, I looked at the wall where Brianna had arranged the family photo display. Most were standard vacations, baby showers, press releases. In the center was a picture from my 60th birthday. Everyone was gathered in the sunroom, laughing. I stood slightly behind the group. The lamp above cast a shadow over my face. It was the only image she'd printed on canvas. I remember that party. The lemon cake had sunk in the middle because I used almond flour by mistake. Evan joked about it in front of the guests. Brianna handed out little bookmarks with inspirational quotes. One of them read, "Legacy isn't what you leave, it's who you lift." That night, I washed all the wine glasses alone. A single cufflink turned up in the sink. Charles's initials engraved on the back. He never asked if I'd found it. Sometimes I think about the things we notice and choose to ignore. The lipstick on the napkin, the passwords that suddenly stop working, the messages that end with sent from my iPhone, as if that explained everything. There was a moment before dinner that night when Brianna approached me in the hallway. "We've all had our time, Janet. Maybe it's okay to let go with grace." I don't know what she meant by grace. Maybe silence. Maybe stepping aside without requiring applause. She didn't wait for a reply. I went to the kitchen and rearranged the silverware drawer. One fork was missing. The next morning, Charles forwarded an article about rising estate taxes. No greeting, just a link. I didn't reply. Later that week, Brianna texted, "Do you have the original deed from the Hartman expansion? Charles couldn't find it." I didn't answer. I read the message twice, then deleted it. The original copy was in a folder marked Founders. I had placed it there when I still believed clarity would be valued. I sat with the album on my lap. The pages had begun to curl at the edges. Some images were fading, the kind of fading that doesn't come from sunlight, but from too many fingerprints. There was a photo of Evan as a child, holding up a hand-drawn blueprint of a treehouse. Charles had built the base, but I was the one who helped with the railings. No one remembers who hammered the nails, just who stood on the ladder. I turned another page. A picture of our old living room Thanksgiving 2004. My mother in her pink wool sweater. Evan on the couch, one sock missing. Charles mid-laugh. I was in the far left corner, passing someone a plate. My hand was a blur. I closed the album. There's something sharp about realizing that while you were busy preserving memories, others were editing them. Some pictures aren't meant to last. Some you only see clearly once you've stepped out of the frame. Some things are heard not through sound, but through stillness, the kind that presses in when everything else has already slipped out. I hadn't opened the drawer in years. The desk still smelled faintly of cedar and dust, like old paperbacks, and the back of church pews. I was looking for the Hartwell Grant folder, something Evan had referenced in passing. Instead, at the bottom, Beneath an outdated policy binder and a dried-out pen, I found a small black USB. No label, no lanyard. Just that weightless kind of object that feels heavier once plugged in. The laptop took a moment to recognize it. Then folders appeared, all dated, all named by room and angle. I clicked one. Conf Room A, South Cam. I didn't blink for the first 10 minutes. Brianna was perched on the table legs, crossed like a child too comfortable in a room she hadn't built. Charles leaned back in the leather chair mine originally. The grain had worn down where my elbow used to rest. Her hand brushed his shoulder. You know he's easy. Just a little touch and he'll sign whatever I need. His laugh came through thin and clipped. Janet never knew how to make anyone feel needed. She just filled the room without meaning to. Like furniture that won't move. They both looked at the closed door. I watched all 7 videos. Each one the same room, the same voices. Sometimes Evan's usually quiet asking about restructuring. Brianna answered for him. Charles nodded. I copied everything to an external drive. Saved the folder under the name Shadow Notes and slid it beneath a stack of cookbooks in the kitchen. I didn't delete the original USB. I placed it back in the drawer beneath the pen and shut the desk. That evening, I reheated leftover chicken and arranged the plates. 3 spots. I folded cloth napkins, the yellow ones. Charles entered first. He glanced at the table, then at the thermostat. It's stuffy, he muttered. Why is it always stuffy when you cook? I said nothing. Brianna walked in a few moments later, scrolling on her phone. Smells homemade, she said. I passed the salad bowl across. She didn't reach for it. Evan wasn't there, he was working late. That had become common lately. Midway through the meal, I poured another glass of water for Charles. A scent, sharp, woody, rose as he leaned toward the breadbasket. You're wearing something new. He looked up, an expression unreadable. Because someone appreciates how a man should smell. Brianna smirked, not lifting her eyes from her screen. Some women don't need to prove themselves in the kitchen. Their value shows up elsewhere. I continued cutting the carrots into even thirds. One snapped slightly too loud against the plate. After dinner, I wiped the countertop, slowly polishing away a small ring left by Charles's tumbler. His glass always left marks, never centered, always tilted. He made a phone call from the den. I wasn't trying to listen. The speaker was on. She just exists like static. She's a ghost in this house. I'm the only one who hasn't thrown her out yet. The call ended with a chuckle I'd once heard on our honeymoon, back when it meant something else entirely. I didn't speak of the video. Not that night. Not the next morning. Instead, I washed the napkins, folded them into perfect squares, and set them back in the drawer. I scrolled through my emails. Evan hadn't replied to my last message. Just a forwarded link Q3 budget planning draft. The kind of message that doesn't require a mother, just a witness. I opened the fridge, stared at the untouched jar of raspberry preserves, and wondered who had moved it to the top shelf. I couldn't reach it anymore. There was a note on the counter, Brianna's handwriting, board meeting on Thursday. Don't forget to confirm catering, no salutation, no signature, just instruction. I didn't attend that meeting. I stayed home, organized the hallway closet, and came across the scarf Evan had given me after college graduation. The hem was frayed. I ironed it, folded it twice, and placed it in the empty space beneath the drive labeled Shadow Notes. That evening, the printer on Charles's desk whirred. I walked in with a paper tray refill. What's this? I asked, looking at the sheet before he could take it. Preliminary revisions to the trust, he said, without blinking. Nothing final. Whose name replaces mine? He didn't pause. People grow obsolete. You made your choices. I laid the tray on the edge of the desk. Brianna entered behind me. "Don't worry, Janet. We'll take good care of everything. You don't have to stretch yourself anymore." I stared at the bottom drawer, the one where we kept old tax files, the one she now had the key to. Neither of them waited for my reply. They turned toward the hallway, continuing their conversation mid-step. Later, I sat on the edge of the bed, my shoes still on. My hands rested on my knees. The mattress dipped unevenly from years of uneven weight. I remembered a conversation from years ago. Evan had been 10. He asked why I never threw away old letters. Because even a lie once written tells you something about the person holding the pen. He hadn't understood then. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry. I listened to the small clicks of Charles's watch on the nightstand. The second hand never ticked. It glided. In the morning, I took the glass he used each night and placed it gently in the dishwasher. I wiped the sink twice. There was a hairline crack along the faucet base. I'd never noticed it before. Some breaks aren't sudden. They start quietly, a shift you don't feel until the structure gives. And by then, it's not worth patching. It's worth remembering. Quietly, without telling anyone. Some words aren't meant to be answered. They settle in the air like dust and wait for silence to fold around them. The frame had shifted slightly, leaning too far left. It used to hang straight in the hallway, our wedding photo. I noticed it while adjusting the vase below one Brianna kept rearranging when she thought I wasn't looking. Her perfume still lingered faintly near the curtain edges. The camera I placed was no larger than a compact. Tucked behind the bookshelf, it pointed at nothing and everything. It caught her laughing. She stood in front of the photograph, arms folded, hair pulled tight like always. She stared at it for a while before leaning in. "You looked like a wax doll even then," she muttered. "Can't imagine how he stood sleeping next to that for 40 years. Then she spit quick and deliberate. A small dot landed on my side of the photo. She didn't wipe it off. She just adjusted the frame back to crooked and walked away. I saved the clip. Not to confront her, not even to threaten. Just to remember the way some people tell you the truth when they think no one is watching. I stood in our bedroom later that night. The room hadn't changed in years. Same quilted bedspread, same chipped mirror. His shoes were still by the door, neatly aligned. One pair, black leather, was missing a lace. I used to fix that, replace them quietly before he noticed. I didn't touch them. The drawer in the nightstand opened stiffly. I reached inside and pulled out the ring, thin now the engraving almost rubbed away. It left a circle of warmth on my finger that took too long to fade. Beside it, I placed a folded slip of paper, plain printer stock. No flourishes, no salutation. Let's pretend I was never here. I left the drawer slightly open, enough to be noticed, enough to not be mistaken for accident. My suitcase was already packed. I had done it the night before methodically, like organizing receipts. 2 shirts, both faded, a navy scarf, the teacup I kept from my mother wrapped in old tissue paper, my passport. I wasn't going anywhere, but it felt like something I should take just in case I needed to prove I still existed. I slipped out just after 4. No lights, no sound. The door didn't creak, not even a little. The driveway was still damp from last night's watering system. I stepped around the edge, careful not to leave footprints on the stone. In the car, I sent one message. "Rachel, I have footage audio statements. Need advice on when to release. For now, I choose absence over explanation." Then I turned off the phone. I drove east for a while, past places I used to grocery shop, past the dry cleaner, where the woman still called me Miss Janet, even after I corrected her once. I thought of stopping for coffee, but I didn't want the sound of conversation. Not yet. I pulled into a motel off a county road. One with plastic chairs outside the rooms and vending machines that hummed too loud. I paid in cash. The front desk clerk barely looked up. Inside, I unfolded the scarf and placed it over the chair. I laid the teacup on the nightstand. The weight of it made the laminate dip slightly. I left the television off. I sat, then stood, then sat again. That was when the quiet began to feel full instead of hollow. The silence in our home had grown too clean, too practiced. It had turned into a place where people spoke around me, not to me. A place where my name meant pause, not presence. Once Charles had told a dinner guest, Janet knows how to disappear into her own house. It's a skill. I think he meant it as a compliment. When I turned 50, I'd baked my own cake. Brianna brought store-bought pastries, just in case, and placed them beside mine. Her plate was served first. Evan didn't notice, or chose not to. During the toast, Charles raised his glass. To another year of quiet dignity. No one clapped. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and pine air freshener. I opened the window half an inch, enough to let in the rustle of leaves, but not the voices. I thought about the phrase Brianna used last week while looking at quarterly projections. We need less nostalgia, more efficiency. I had nodded. I always nodded. That was my role. I'd become a pause, a placeholder in the background. The one who remembered the birthdays, kept the ledgers in order, made sure no one sent thank you cards with typos. But I wasn't part of the strategy anymore. I wasn't part of anything. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened a notebook. The same one I used to keep by the pantry, where I wrote down recipes I never followed. I made a list, not of grievances, but of things no one else knew. Where the original bylaws were filed, the security code override for the main building, who Charles met with in Atlanta the day he told me he was reconnecting with his brother. The name on the second trust account created the same week I stepped down. I didn't intend to use them. But I didn't intend to forget them either. Outside, a car door slammed. A voice muttered something about ice. Then it faded. I looked down at my hands, plain-lined, steady. Still mine. No ring, no stain, no need for ceremony. They might rewrite the minutes, reshuffle the board, rename the fund. They might repaint the hallway and straighten the photograph, maybe even replace it. But the footage exists. The sound of his voice calling me a ghost. The laughter that came too quickly after. The spit drying on my face in a photograph. I didn't need to raise my own voice. I just needed to leave, while I could still remember what silence was supposed to sound like. The first night, I didn't lock the bedroom door. It wasn't deliberate, not at first. I'd reached for the knob out of habit and realized there was no reason to turn it. No footsteps down the hall, no perfume lingering on borrowed skin, no voices layered with expectation. Just the sound of wind outside and the slow creak of settling wood. The cabin had been listed under seasonal retreat in a short ad near the back of a local paper. No pictures, just a phone number and a note. No internet, no TV, no pets. Yes to quiet. The owner left a single skeleton key beneath a ceramic frog on the porch. That small joke made me stay longer than planned. Each morning I made toast on the stove. Real toast, not the kind from the chrome machine Brianna called vintage minimalist. Just bread, heat, and patience. The crusts burned slightly. I didn't scrape them off. I wrote in a notebook I found in the cabin's bottom drawer. Wide ruled, a few ink stains on the back cover. On the first page, I wrote one line. Today was the first time I lived without being defined by how someone looked at me. There were no mirrors in the cabin. One afternoon, while sorting through the books left behind by other tenants, I opened a copy of My Antonia. A small envelope slid from between the pages, yellowed and soft at the corners. My name was on it. Not typed, written. I knew the script. My mother's. I don't remember packing that book. Maybe I had meant to. Maybe something meant for me had followed. Inside was a single-page letter, folded twice, sealed with a piece of dried tape. Near the end, the ink had faded, but the words still held. If the day comes when you find yourself erased, don't shout. Walk. Let the sound of the door closing speak for you. I didn't cry. I folded it back into the envelope, placed it under my pillow. That night I dreamt of a dinner table with no seats. Rachel's voice came through the cabin's landline 2 days later, the only call I took. "I've been reviewing the documents," she said. "There's a transfer happening. Several, actually. Property titles, business shares moving into Brianna's name. The timeline is fast. Too fast." I didn't answer immediately. I pressed my thumb into the edge of my teacup until the ceramic edge left a pale line on my skin. "We could act now," she continued. "But I'd suggest watching. If they cross one more line, especially on the foundation account, we can charge forgeries and premeditated fraud." I kept looking at the notebook where I had written nothing else. The silence stretched. Finally, I offered only one thought: I won't stop them. I'll let them walk far enough that they bury themselves. Rachel didn't argue. When I hung up, I made a copy of the video files again, this time onto a separate drive wrapped in a wool sock and placed inside the chimney's flue. Just in case. I didn't read the news. I didn't check my email. I didn't refresh any pages or wait for messages that once came with blue bubbles and delay ellipses. If someone had written, I wouldn't have seen it. The only screen I faced was my laptop's now mostly black, except for the faint timestamp in the corner of a paused frame. Brianna's legs crossed on the conference table, Charles holding a pen. I didn't press play. Instead, I hung the brass wind chime near the back porch. It had belonged to my mother, though I'd packed it away years ago after she passed. She'd said it never really rang unless the air had something to say. It rang that evening, just once. A low, round note. The cabin had no dining table. I sat on the floor with a blanket and ate toast with jam I hadn't opened in years. The label read, "Christmas 2014, Batch 3. I didn't remember who gave it to me. Maybe I'd made it. There had been a time when I labeled jars in cursive. The video stayed open in the background, always waiting. I didn't feel rushed. The silence gave me more room than words ever had. Evan hadn't called. He might never. I imagined what someone might have told him. She left because she couldn't handle the pace anymore. Or maybe she had her turn. It's ours now. That kind of thinking floats easily in families, where inheritance speaks louder than memory. Once Charles told a banker during a holiday mixer, "My wife's skill was always in preservation. She kept things intact so the rest of us could move forward." I don't think he meant it kindly. Here in this cabin, I didn't preserve anything. I let dust settle. I let mold take its time. I let dishes sit until they dried in place. The world didn't collapse. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause or announcements. It looked like a loose sweater, a half-drunk cup of tea, a walk outside, without wondering who might be watching. Before bed, I folded the wedding photo, the physical one. I hadn't meant to bring it, but it was tucked in the back of my planner. A corner of it had coffee on it from the last morning at home. Brianna had left the mug on my files. The stain had bled across the bottom of my face. I didn't throw the picture away. I just folded it so that only the background showed. A blur of trees and sky. I left the laptop open beside me. I whispered to the screen, not to be heard, only to let the words settle where they needed. I'm not silent. I'm just not ready to speak yet. Sometimes I wonder if silence echoes louder for the ones who try to bury it. My phone lit up at 12:04 a.m. I hadn't saved the number, but the way the screen trembled in my hand told me who it was. The call connected before I had the chance to think otherwise. His face filled the screen. First Evan, drawn tight around the mouth hair, pushed back like he'd been pacing. Behind him, she appeared in the mirror, her robe too sheer for decency, too deliberate to be ignored. He didn't say my name. There's a hiccup in the transfer process. Some of Dad's original paperwork is still tied to your signature. We need to finalize it for the foundation to move forward. I reached for the chipped blue mug beside me. The bottom held the outline of old tea leaves. Faint, blurred. Brianna's voice cut in sharp and amused. It's just logistics, Janet. No one's asking for a kidney. The house is empty. You're not coming back, are you? He cleared his throat. We're only asking because our lawyer says it'll be cleaner if you if you give consent. Not even full ownership, just administrative. I said nothing. His screen stilled, then went black. I didn't call back. Later that morning, Rachel's name lit up on a secure messaging line we'd agreed to use. Charles filed a deed transfer using your forged signature. Local authorities haven't caught it yet. I've flagged the clerk's office. You were right to wait. I forwarded nothing. I said nothing. Instead, I mailed a manila envelope to Carl Mendoza, detective retired. Once he'd helped me when my sister disappeared for 3 days in high school. He still owed me a favor, though we never said that aloud. Inside the envelope was a USB with 2 files and 1 sentence typed on a 3x5 index card. Sometimes what's stolen isn't money. It's the right to remain whole. 3 nights later, someone knocked. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the kind used to test locks. I watched from behind the drawn curtain. He stood just under the porch light, tall, wiry, with one hand in his coat pocket, and the other adjusting a tie he wasn't really wearing. He called out once. Mrs. Whitmore. I'm with Golden Vale Property Group. Just here to ask about a potential offer. Nothing binding. I didn't open the door. The camera by the wind chimes caught his license plate. I recognized the crest on the bumper sticker. Charles had it printed on limited edition wine bottles 5 years ago. No one else used that logo but his company. The next morning, I printed the frame and slipped it into the drawer beside my bed. I placed it on top of a folded scarf my mother gave me the year Charles and I married, ivory silk, hand-stitched initials. The thread had begun to loosen at the edges. It held better than our vows. A week passed. Then a letter came. Not handwritten, not personal typed, folded, sealed in a glossy envelope that smelled faintly of synthetic citrus. Inside, a real estate inquiry form. Blank lines for me to list desired sale price. A printed note at the bottom read, "We understand change can be unsettling. Let us relieve the burden." No return address. But the postage code traced back to Brianna's boutique district office. I didn't sign it. Instead, I opened my laptop. The folder marked "Not Yet" had not been touched since I last backed it up. I scrolled, paused, watched the thumbnail that showed her hand on his shoulder, and his voice low and dry. Not the worst clip, just the one that sounded like truth when heard in a quiet room. I composed an email. 1 line, no subject. Your offer for the cabin is noted. I'm sure you'll understand if I choose not to sell my heir. Then I attached 1 video. Not the full set, just the first 6 seconds. I hit send. Then I powered the machine down. That afternoon, Evan called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. I don't know what's going on, Mom, but whatever this is, it's not fair to Dad. You leaving like that? You made things worse. There was a pause. Then softer, with something else in his throat. She's trying to keep things from blowing up. You could help if you wanted to. You used to care. I replayed it twice. Then I reached for the silver fountain pen I hadn't touched in years. The one Charles gave me for our 20th anniversary. The one I'd stopped using because he once told me my handwriting looked too rigid, too formal, like a person who doesn't know how to bend. I wrote on the back of the real estate form, "If I am rigid, it's because your world tried to bend me without asking." I folded it into quarters and placed it in the fireplace. No fire, no flames, just the quiet suggestion of ash. They came back, yes, but they weren't looking for me. They were looking for the last name that still meant leverage for the quiet woman they assumed had no claws, because she spoke in measured tones. They came because silence unnerves the guilty more than confrontation. And I chose not to fill that silence with noise. Not yet. The name on the return label didn't match anyone I knew. I used scissors careful along the edge of the tape. Inside was a document folded into thirds with a clipped note on top, ink slightly smeared as if written in haste. No greeting, no name, just one sentence in uneven print. "You think it's just the house. They plan to erase you entirely." The paper beneath it was a copy of a life insurance policy. My name had been scratched out and replaced with Brianna's. The date beside Charles's signature was 3 months ago. I stared at it without blinking. The signature was familiar, too familiar. The curve of the J had always leaned forward, like it was afraid to commit. Except now it leaned the wrong way, like someone had mimicked it by memory instead of by hand. I wrapped the paper in a manila envelope and dropped it in the outgoing box at the bookshop. I didn't write a note to Rachel. I didn't need to. I'd started working there the week before shelving donations and relabeling vintage mystery novels. Most of the covers were faded, curled at the corners, the kind of books that smelled like attics and old soap. No one asked me anything personal. I served coffee. I restocked the paperbacks. I went home. At night, I reread the evidence I'd gathered as if it were a detective novel. I used color-coded tabs. One for falsified documents, one for video, one for recorded voice. I didn't rush. I didn't explain. A week later, Rachel called. Her voice wasn't surprised, just steady. She forged the policy, she said. Witness line blank. No notary. They plan to file it as part of the estate update next month. I didn't reply. I just listened. Then she added, "You're not the first." Her firm had contacted a colleague named Alex Green, a former federal investigator, now private, quiet, meticulous. He'd started looking into Brianna's background quietly. I sat with that name for a while. Not her name. The other one. Eleanor Bristow. 86. No children. Passed away 6 years ago. Rachel sent over the obituary and the probate documents. I printed them. The ink on my home printer was running low, and the lines came out faint, like the story didn't want to be told too loudly. 3 months before Eleanor's death, her assets were transferred real estate securities, one antique car. Everything to a newly assigned executor of care. The name Brianna Ward then listed as a part-time home aide. The death had been ruled cardiac arrest. No autopsy was requested. It was enough. I didn't want public fury. I didn't want newspaper headlines or think pieces about elder fraud. I wanted something slower, heavier, something that settled deep and quiet like truth, with nowhere left to hide. I drafted a letter to the Elder Justice Project. I used a blue ink pen. The same kind I used when I used to write birthday cards by hand back when I still believed a handwritten message could soften a person. I wrote, "This isn't for press. This isn't for pity. This is for the women who vanish while still alive, whose names are removed from deeds and documents before they're gone from the world. I've collected records. I've verified the dates. You may do with them as you see fit. I won't be visible. But I'll be listening." I sealed it. I didn't reread it. Later that week, Brianna called. Her number came through as private. I was sitting at the back of the bookstore stacking a donation box labeled outdated. She didn't pause. You really think you can stop this with paperwork? You think old women get justice? We have attorneys. We have advisors. You have what your tea and your feelings, I didn't answer. Then came the laugh. That sharp high one she used when she believed the game was already won. You don't even know how to fight. You wait. You fade. You disappear. And you expect the world to applaud because you stayed quiet while it buried you. I let her finish. The call disconnected on her end. I folded the receipt I had been holding and tucked it into the inside cover of a book. The Woman in White. Its spine was cracked in the center. Someone had tried to press it flat, not realizing it would never fully close again. That evening, Alex sent over a file. Photographs, text messages, voice memos dated months ago. All of it confirming a pattern: fraud, coercion, threats, patterns of control. He included a scanned letter from Eleanor's neighbor, typed and unsigned. She wasn't sick. She wasn't dying. One day, she just stopped answering the door. Then the car disappeared. Then her name. I didn't forward it. Instead, I printed it on resume weight paper and tucked it behind the mirror above the sink. The one with 3 bulbs, though only one ever worked. There are moments when fire looks like still water. Rachel emailed again the next morning. There was a quiet tone to her text. No bold, no italics. They're speeding up the transfers. I recommend you file first. You'd still be within statute. I typed back 2 lines. I won't stop them. Let them run faster. Then I opened my notebook and wrote only 1 sentence. Some wolves get caught not because they grow louder, but because the forest stops moving. I closed the notebook. I turned off the light above the sink. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't check the door. I never liked the sound of mechanical pens. They scratch instead of glide, as if every signature carves something out of you. The man at the bank wore a navy suit, but the tie felt too cheerful for this kind of form. He shuffled the pages without comment until his thumb stopped at the clause from 1985. A line buried in subtext, drafted by my mother, notarized in ink, now fading, but still legal. If at any time trust is breached through deception or coercion, rights revert to the matriarchal line. That was the language she preferred, clinical distant absolute. Do you have the original deed? I slid it across. And your identification under Moore? I handed it over. No one in the room asked why the name had changed. Moore wasn't an escape. It was the name on my school backpack, the one on my birth certificate, the one I'd tucked away like a forgotten address. I'll process this for reinstatement, he said. Effective immediately, the property returns under sole stewardship of the Moore Trust. There was no applause, just a clock ticking louder than necessary and the smell of overbrewed coffee in the corner. I folded the copy neatly and placed it back into the envelope next to the old photograph I hadn't shown anyone. My mother holding the deed with her knuckles sharp as questions. That was the last thing she gave me before her health turned and the house turned quiet. At home, I opened the cedar box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were 3 items: a spare USB stick, a notarized letter to the district attorney, and a folded page labeled Transfer of Intent. I mailed all 3. Then I wrote to Evan. No headers. No warmth. You're not cruel, but you stopped looking, and when you stop looking, others fill in the blanks. This is not about punishment. It's about finishing what was erased. I included a copy of the video, not the one from the living room. This one showed handwriting analysis cross-verified by 2 specialists. Brianna had practiced my signature 23 times on a yellow notepad. One corner was smudged with lipstick. The package also contained a photo of his birth certificate. I highlighted one line in red mother's name, Janet Elise Moore. When he was born, I signed that line in a hospital gown, hair still damp, hands shaking. I remembered the nurse saying strong name. Not easy to forget. Apparently, it had been. The call came 2 nights later. I didn't answer. The voicemail was 7 seconds of silence, followed by, I saw the file. I'll be in touch. I deleted it. Some things aren't owed a response. By Thursday, the legal firm representing Charles had gone quiet. Rachel forwarded me a notice of financial inquiry. One line stood out. All current transfers involving the Harper estate are frozen, pending investigation of forged documents. I read it while eating toast. The corner had burned. I ate around it. Later, a truck pulled into the gravel road near the cabin. Not the usual delivery van. A black sedan windows-tinted engine, too quiet. I stepped outside with a mug in my hand. The air smelled like damp earth and something synthetic, like hairspray or cover-up. Brianna stood there, coat open heels, sinking into the soil. She didn't wait for welcome. "You think you're so clever," she muttered. One paper, one file, and suddenly you're Moses splitting the damn sea. I didn't speak. She wasn't here for conversation. I know things, she added, voice tighter. Things Charles wouldn't want out. You're not the only one with a flash drive. She reached into her purse, held something small between 2 fingers. I could take you down with this. I raised my hand not to stop her, just to point toward the camera on the porch, blinking steadily. She faltered. I stepped back into the house, left the door open. The cabin smelled of lemon wood polish and chamomile. Nothing expensive, just clean. She followed but stopped at the doorway. Her breath caught on something invisible. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I tapped the recorder on the table. A voice played back rough and slurred. "If she dies in her sleep, we all win. You don't get it. She's already dead to him." The audio had a timestamp. It was her voice. She stood very still. "You don't know what I've done for this family," she said. "I held them together while you floated in your little bubble of rules and books and tea. You think silence makes you righteous. It just makes you forgettable." I looked at the mug in my hand. The tea bag string had curled into the shape of a 7. Charles used to say that 7 was a lucky number. Brianna took a step forward. "I'll drag you into court if I have to." I picked up the envelope on the table, already stamped, addressed to the Elder Fraud Division. I already sent it. Her jaw tightened. "You smug little—" She stopped. My laptop screen lit up. The email read, "Evidence uploaded successfully." Brianna backed away. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She just turned, walked to the car, and drove off with one tire scraping the edge of the gravel. I stood for a long time after she left. The wind outside had picked up. The bell by the window frame clinked once. Just once. I didn't check the news that night. I made a sandwich. I folded the laundry. I lit one candle. Then I opened my journal and wrote a single line I never needed to win. I only needed the silence to be mine. I never liked courtrooms. The silence always felt too clean, like a floor scrubbed after something was spilled and never spoken of again. The wooden bench held me steady. I kept my hands folded in my lap. The coat I wore was plain and warm sleeves, slightly frayed at the cuffs. I'd stitched them years ago during a storm that kept us home for 3 days. No one noticed. They never did. Across the room, Charles stood in a dark suit that no longer fit the way he thought it did. His posture betrayed the weight of what he'd built and what it had cost. Brianna sat beside him, her lips parted just enough to look surprised, though none of this should have surprised her. Janet Moore Walker remains the lawful beneficiary of the Whitman Trust, the judge said, voice firm but not raised, and the property protected under the 1985 Moral Clause is therefore non-transferable under breach. The word breach landed without fanfare. Charles Walker and Brianna Caldwell Walker convicted on counts of legal forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation, and conspiracy to commit property theft. Charles didn't look at me. His shoulders collapsed inward like a building meant to stay tall, but hollowed from the base. I remembered how he used to order wine by the label, not the taste. Brianna whispered something. Then louder, I loved him. This wasn't theft. This was survival. The judge didn't blink. You loved control. But control is not a defense. I rose when it was over. There was nothing else to collect. The documents were back in my name. The family trust intact. The voice that had once called me redundant was now listed under the Department of Corrections. Rachel touched my elbow outside the courtroom. "We won," she mouthed. I nodded. But I never used the word win. Not for this. Not for anything that required silence to endure. News traveled fast. A reporter's voice filled the hallway. In a case that's gripped the state, an elderly mother-in-law erased from her own family, only to strike back, not with vengeance, but evidence. I kept walking. That headline wasn't mine. None of them ever were. A week passed. I trimmed the lavender myself. The clippers were dull, but I liked the resistance. The scent stayed on my hands long after the stems were gone. He came in the afternoon. Evan. He parked further than needed and walked the gravel path like someone unsure of the ground. His shirt was wrinkled. The corners of his mouth looked chewed. "Mom?" I didn't speak. He opened the paper bag he carried and placed it on the bench. I left the company. Signed the paperwork this morning. I'm not taking a cent from them. Not even what they say I earned. He didn't look up. "You know what's worse than lying? Pretending not to see the truth standing right in front of you. I heard you crying once, and I turned up the volume on the TV." The wind moved the branches slightly. He stayed kneeling. "I let them erase you, because it made things easier for me. And now there's no noise left, just this." He reached into the bag. First, a notarized copy of his resignation from Walker Enterprises. Then a folded sheet in his handwriting. "I forfeit all inheritance claims and commit to 2 years of unpaid work for women's legal defense services." And lastly, a jar of golden honey. The old kind we used to make before he wanted better things. I sat beside him. My coat brushed his arm. He flinched like it hurt. He whispered, "You don't have to forgive me. But if there's still room for a beginning..." I didn't reply with words. I placed my hand on his shoulder, not warm, not cold, just there. He helped me wipe the dust from the old wooden sign nailed to the gate. The carving had faded, but the name was still legible, Morehouse. He traced the letters with his thumb. I didn't know it was still called that. I picked up a cloth and ran it across the letters again. No one really asked. Later he made tea and placed the cup next to mine without asking how I liked it. It was bitter oversteeped. He drank it anyway. I opened the cedar box, the one lined with felt and silence. Inside the hard drive, a backup copy of everything: videos, bank records, notarized timelines, medical charts, forged signatures, audio files. Evan stared at it. "I guess you'll keep that safe," he said. I looked at the lake. The surface was still. "No," I replied. "I don't need to prove anything anymore." He watched as I dropped it into the water. It sank with no resistance. No splash, just a soft ripple and the return of quiet. The bees still came, just fewer now. They seemed to know which flowers were worth landing on. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't tell the press a thing. The court transcripts were public, but I never read them again. I didn't check the hashtags or read the comments under the videos people shared of Brianna weeping in cuffs. Some said I got justice. Others said I got lucky. But I knew I got something else. I got to keep the name I was born with. I got to sit in silence without fearing it. I got to trim lavender without anyone asking when I'd be done. I didn't reclaim a family. I revealed one. And now the door stays unlocked. Not because I expect anyone, but because I'm no longer afraid of what comes through it.